Okay, good afternoon, and first of all, big thank you to Sean and to Highlands and to the University Lecture Series for inviting me over to give this talk. It's great to have any excuse to come back to Jersey, but wonderful to see so many friends and colleagues here, and hopefully tomorrow as well at the talk I'm giving at the Pearson pub. For some of you, this will be a lot of material that you've seen before. I'm going to be presenting some of the results of our work over the past 6 or 7 years. But what I want to do is present today how we're starting to think about our work, not just in a regional level, but at a global level. The work that we're doing here in Jersey, on an island, is being undertaken because islands provide us with snapshots of past human landscape use in parts of the Earth's landscape which are submerged and largely inaccessible to us. They provide sample points for exploring completely lost worlds, completely lost regions, and in some case, completely lost continental scale landscapes. Jersey provides just one such opportunity. We are here to study the incredible scientific record and archaeological record of the island, but we're as equally interested in the glimpses it gives us of what lies beneath the seas around the island. So today I want to present some of those results to you. I also want to be a bit introspective and a bit thoughtful about how we deal with our narratives of island archaeology and continental archaeology, and how we use that archaeology to think across the geopolitical boundaries either of modern geography or of modern national borders. So yeah, we'll have a little exploration of not only the geopolitics, but also our psychological engagement, the psychogeography of these landscapes. I also want to flag up right at the beginning, although I'm here, and once again I'm giving a talk, I'm just one of an incredible team that I work with, a team that's drawn from a number of British institutions: the British Museum, Southampton University, the University of Wales, Manchester University, all working together here for 6 years, and now building up networks with the University of Caen, the University of Rennes, the University of Leiden. So we're a fully international team now. And I think that's one of the exciting things about working in Jersey, in a sense, from our two main academic traditions. This is a neutral ground where we can bring two academic traditions together, as it should have been from the beginning, to look at the wider region. So I'm going to be summarizing quite a lot of research that's been carried out here. Sean introduced the potential the island has for postgraduate study, and postgraduate study where it thrives in a research-led environment. That is, being taught by staff, researchers who are actively engaged in material and can bring the students along on that journey. That's what we've been able to do here in Jersey. We've been able to bring our students over here, involve them in our research, and now I'm pleased to say some of them are going on and doing PhDs, and that's a really important part of research. The other important part of research is working with people who live within the landscape, who understand that landscape. And so we've been really lucky here to work with great partners, especially the Société Jersaise, that has, the long-standing tradition of expertise in the archaeology here, and Jersey Heritage, who curate the island's archaeological collections and many of the archaeological sites. This should be the springboard to engaging ever further, not only with schools, with the young, but to wider community groups. And hopefully, as this project goes forward, we'll think of new creative ways to involve more and more people in the work we do. I'm not going to spend too much time summarizing all of the research that we've done here, but I'll be dipping in and out of different sites that we've worked on over the past few years. Dominating our interest and our record, our understanding of the record of the island, is Le Cote de Saint-Brelade, which is the site which, as I'll explain, drew us first to Jersey as a research team and will keep us focused here and busy for many years to come. This isn't going to be a lecture about Le Cote. We couldn't do a lecture about Lockwood anymore. We'd have to give you a day on Lockwood and in terms of how we now understand the site. But Lockwood overshadows everything. It sits there, not only a beautiful, stunning, imposing headland, but the key regional sequence of Neanderthal behavior, climate change and environmental change in Northwest Europe. There's nothing like it. It's your absolute treasure, and this is the thing that really sits at the heart of the entire region. We have focused in largely on early prehistory. Up until this point in time, our research aims and our research scope has been from the earliest occupation of the Channel Islands, wherever that might be. At the moment, we've traced it back maybe as far as 300,000 years. It's undoubtedly older. We just haven't found that record yet. Taking it through until the flooding of the English Channel, the end of the Mesolithic and the beginning of the Neolithic, early prehistory. In terms of the sites that we've investigated or has been part of this study, you can see undoubtedly most of them are coastal. This is for two reasons. One, the coastline of islands is an important niche. It's an important niche to Neanderthals. It's probably an important niche to earlier hominins coming before that, earlier human species. It's important for modern hunter-gatherers, and it's important through later prehistory. The island edge at points where we're in cold stages and the sea level is lower are giving you shelter and command over vast landscapes. Of course, coming through to later prehistory, when this is sea, then referencing the sea and putting symbolic monuments like standing stones and burial mounds on coastal headlands with a view of that sea becomes really important too. Intertidal environments are really important in terms of their diversity. So there's no coincidence in that sense that we have this importance of island coasts in the region. The interior, however, is terra incognita. For large parts of this interior, there's 3 to 5 meters of wind-blown Ice Age sediment covering the interior, and we have no idea what that wind-blown loess is covering. In similar areas in northern France, it covers entire land surfaces with really brilliantly preserved prehistoric archaeology going way back into antiquity. For us, it's terra incognita, and if you look at a prehistoric map of Brittany or Normandy, you'll see a similar distribution. But in those places, they have road schemes, canals that go through the interior and show what the potential is. One hint of the potential that you might get in the interior comes from one of our excavations, an excavation that we had focused at Les Varines in St. Saviour's, where we are digging in a very unremarkable field on a very unremarkable slope, characteristic of the slopes that overlie the edge of the plateau and the coastal plain area throughout the island. Except in this area we had exceptional preservation of an Ice Age land surface, including thousands of artifacts to this point in time, but also now the earliest engraved pieces in this part of Northwest Europe. This is one of them. They come from the late Magdalenian, a period around 14,500 years ago. These are the first modern humans to move north into Northwest Europe after the coldest period of the last glaciation, and they bring with them abstract art. Unfortunately, early Magdalenian people are making wonderful frescoes of deer and mammoth in the caves in southern Europe. By the time they come north, they're making abstract patterns. And this is where we're focusing one of our major excavations and be continuing this summer. So that's a bit of a background to our work. Let's think more widely about islands and lost landscapes. These are World War II forts, and you may know that there is one of them which is the capital of Sealand, a self-declared principality out there in the North Sea. They also gave rise to pirate radio stations in the 1960s. They're liminal territories engineered by war and then creating these kind of offshore places that now have servers for things like online gambling and pirate spaces in our offshore sector. We have a deeply ingrained psychology and collective vision of the offshore submerged landscape, and this goes deep into our folklore. The myths of Northwest Europe are shared with the coastlines of large parts of the planet, that under the sea or over the waves lie mythical lands. Logres, Tir-na-nog, Cantre'r, Avalon, are all Celtic myths of potentially survivals of a memory of submerged landscapes, or making sense of strange and ambiguous records that are coming out off the sea. What would fishermen make where they were dredging up a mammoth skull back in the medieval period? Or the tide might go out after a big storm and they'd see tree trunks as far as the eye could see. The subconscious needs to make some kind of connection with these indications of dry land that come from the seabed. This is a picture of St. Michael's Mount. I can't pronounce the name in Cornish, but the name in Cornish means the grey rock in the forest. Now, when tide goes out after a storm event, there are tree trunks from a Bronze Age forest here. I'm not suggesting for a second there's any folk survival of a Bronze Age memory of that landscape being inundated, but I believe in the early medieval period people needed to make sense of the fact that there were trees there under the sea and under the sand, not just in this landscape but around the entire coastline of southern Britain, Western Britain, Ireland and northwest France, and of course the Channel Islands. If you think of the Minkies as this kind of liminal landscape, which at some points in time is just a few rocks, at other points could be an extensive landscape. I don't quite believe it gets bigger than Jersey. I'd like to see the proof of that. But of course, it's an extensive landscape on an extreme low tide. It shows that what is dry land and what is the sea is something that is negotiated, is something that's in flux, is something that can change, and under certain tidal and meteorological conditions, that change can be huge. We also need to think about how modern populations are engaging with their past in these regions. Things that kind of irk us a little is things like media coverage that starts to talk about submerged landscapes like Doggerland, using mythic language of Atlantis that kind of cuts over the folklore and the engagement that populations locally might have, invoking other equally mythic landscapes. We also think really carefully about where people are getting their information now about the past, especially about the past of Northern Europe. Looking at YouGov data, you can type in interests, sewing, cooking, whatever, and see what typical people, what their behaviors are, what else they like, how they might vote, what their income bracket is, and build up a typical picture of people interested in these different areas. Interesting when we look at prehistory, and we look at interests like metal detecting, where people are getting their information from. British metal detecting community get their information from Britain First, right-wing website. We're basically the National Front now. The UK Independence Party and David Icke, the David Icke website. Looking at these nexuses of interest means that there is now, as we know, an information battle out there. There's an information battle, alternative facts are out there, and we, as prehistorians, end up sometimes in the middle of it. I'll give you some other examples later on. Politics come into lots of negotiations about islands and islands archaeology. If we look at, I'll give you a couple examples. So headlines a little while ago, some hand axes were found on Lesvos. The press was, this is the earliest Palaeolithic in Greece. If you lower the sea level, Lesvos sits here just off the coast of Turkey. Continentally, in terms of the geography, the reality, Greece and Lesvos are a pole apart. There's deep ocean between them the whole time. It's a contiguous part of Turkey. That is a claim made within a modern geopolitical reality. Also, work being undertaken in Naxos and in Crete is finding Middle Paleolithic artifacts, which they're suggesting are Neanderthal artifacts. This is significant because it's a long way south from Neanderthals, and these islands have never been connected by dry land to any continental mainland. So they're making claims that Neanderthals must have made and fashioned boats Two problems with this. One, it's perfectly possible for people to make artifacts which look like Middle Paleolithic artifacts that Neanderthals make in later periods. These aren't dated in any way. And Crete and Naxos are just as close to the Middle East and just as close to Africa as they are to mainland Greece. And in those areas, there are modern humans, probably with boats, contemporary with Neanderthals. But because these are Greek islands, they look north. And they look north to Neanderthal and Neanderthal prehistory rather than south and to an African prehistory of modern humans. It's all about which way island communities orientate themselves. We've got a real problem here. This is Southeast Asia. This is a now drowned landscape called Sundaland. It's like a small continent. It's absolutely huge and joins up all the islands of Indonesia with Southeast Asia. Sat right in the middle of it now is the South China Sea, where new islands are being built for air bases and missile bases by China. It's one of the major flashpoints. It's a flashpoint which sits within now a submerged landscape. So bigger political boundaries can sit there and cross these submerged continents which are of interest to us in understanding humans in the past. Here's another continental boundary. If we look at the Iberian evidence for the last Neanderthals in Europe, down there in southwestern Europe, we've got a number of sites that don't have Neanderthal remains, but again have these Middle Paleolithic artifacts. These are claimed to be the last Neanderthals. Some claims 25,000 years ago, completely ignoring that there are modern humans with identical artifacts just on the other sides of the Straits of Gibraltar. Although that crossing has never been looked at, this kind of map disregards North Africa completely, in so much so that they put the legend over here and they put the label for Gibraltar there over Morocco. This is a Europe-centric map ignoring possible past colonization routes. A story last week, the earliest presence in the North Americas, a date coming from Bluefish Cave here in the Yukon. This date, 24,000 years old, geopolitical terms, clearly the earliest evidence for humans in modern geopolitical North America. The fact that this is completely at this time separated by a massive ice sheet from the rest of the Americas, but is part of a submerged landscape which we call Beringia there, which includes eastern Siberia and Alaska, includes the Aleutian Islands. That is the geographical reality. This isn't part of the story of the Americas. This is part of a continent that is now lost to us. And although you cannot resist that headline because of the modern geopolitical reality, it really it doesn't do justice to the past. This is where, hands up when we do our mea culpa, we are we're guilty of presenting our research in confused ways in the past. Our paper, you can't see it here, but our JQS paper talks about the last Neanderthal signal in Northwest Europe for Jersey. That's absolutely fine here. Here we got some media coverage talking about Jersey in terms of the Channel Islands. Here, and this is what happens, we make a point of never ever talking to the Daily Mail. In fact, UK Science have boycotted the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail does some of the best and most extensive archaeology coverage going. Pages and pages, really good pictures and really good text from elsewhere. Here they talk about the oldest artwork in the British Isles for Jersey. No mention here of the connection, the geographical closeness to the continent. Just as an aside, the reason they do such good coverage is to just keep you reading, to keep you in pages and pages and pages, because then you can flip to, is NASA hiding aliens? Is the Earth hollow? And so on. Archaeology here is just clickbait for what I think is quite a bit of pernicious publishing. And you can also go and buy some sportswear as well. Okay, so I think we need to be really nuanced, and it's easy to go for the headlines, but if we're going to give an authentic picture of the past, we need to unpack and explain about ancient geography, ancient landscapes, and where islands sit in relation to contours and to continents and frontiers. Let's just take a bit of a step back in terms of the approach to our region in Northern Europe. Well, we know the connection was at least considered in the 17th century. In the diary of Samuel Peyps, he says, "And there came to us Jonas More, the mathematician to us, and there he did by discourse make us fully believe that England and France were once the same continent by some very good arguments." We don't know what those arguments were, but that's pretty astounding. That's, you know, one of the earliest sort of accounts. He must have been considering ancient geography. By the middle of the 19th century, this seems to have been forgotten. I'll read this out. Wilson, who was quite a good prehistorian, comes up with this. "There is one certain point in this inquiry which the British antiquary possesses over all others, and from whence he can start without fear of error. From our insular position, it's unquestionable that the first colonists of the British Isles must have been able to construct some sort of boat. Without error, unquestionable." So I don't know what happened between the 17th and the 19th century. In the 19th century, of course, an understanding was coming of what actually sat under the bed. I won't read out these quotes, but Charles Lyell was putting together observations from trawlermen and fishermen and sea gravel extraction, showing clearly there had been terrestrial environments under the North Sea and under the English Channel. He imagined that landscape as being pretty flat, and this is a theme I want to carry on. What do we imagine that landscape being like? But Charles Lyell is one thing that's really exciting is in the nautical mapping of the time, the Admiralty chart, they'd picked up these silver pits, these areas out in the North Sea where depth suddenly got very quick. It's very, very deep, very quickly, off the mouth of the Humber. We now know these are glacial tunnel valleys. These are parts of real topography, long, deep tunnel valleys that are probably very important for hunting, lots of archaeology potentially surviving within them. But it's the first hint that there is topography off there, and a name is given to them, a name that's undoubtedly come from local fishermen and other people using that landscape. It was for Clement Reid to first map the submerged landscape of the North Sea. He didn't coin the term Doggerland, but what he did do is refer to this bit of topography, the high ground of Dogger Bank, and map potentially where the rivers are flowing into it. Now, for the English Channel, Clement Reid alluded to the fact that that landscape continued on there. He didn't bother to map it. The first person to map any part of it was Joseph Sinnell, in his fantastic map only a few years after Clement Reid, and I'm sure inspired by Clement Reid's map, who did the same for Jersey and the near environments. A lot of that mapping triggered by Sinnell's interest in the submerged forests around Jersey and the other Channel Islands. The transformative find, and sometimes it only takes one find to transform people's perspectives of landscapes, was this antler point from the North Sea, found by Captain Pilgrim Lockwood of the fishing trawler, the Colinda. And this is now called the Colinda Point, and it's in Norwich Castle Museum. This probably dates to 14,000 years ago. It's probably the same age as Leverine, maybe slightly younger. But it's just one artifact, and it was the first artifact to really ram home. This wasn't just a landscape potentially in which people moved through. This was a landscape maybe in which people lived. And it was the prehistorian Graham Clark, in his Mesolithic age in Britain, moved away from the language of just land bridges and connections between Britain and the continent, and actually suggested that the similarities between cultures in Denmark and the Netherlands and Eastern Britain was because the culture was situated and centered within that submerged landscape. It wasn't simply a corridor you walk through somehow because you wanted to get from the continent to the UK. It requires a change in perception to actually see that cultures can live, and maybe the heartland of some cultures lies offshore, and admitting that what you may have in your terrestrial record is just the periphery, is just the upland area of cultures that are situated submerged. A lot of the 20th century, we have two big flourishings of this. We have Piltdown, which I won't go into, but we have the language of Piltdown coming back again with the discovery of Boxgrove Man, is the search for the earliest Englishmen, and a lot of national pride taken in discoveries in Britain without that recognition that these are species that share a territory with the continent. I have this awful quote from Norman Hammond, who's still the correspondent from the Times today. "A moment like this is not for chauvinism." But wait, but every Englishman may walk a little taller in the recognition that he is descended from such a striking creature. Robin Dennell, who came over here for a workshop we held last year, a great prehistorian, commented on this at the time, absolutely calling out every journalist who claimed Boxgrove for England or for Britain. He said, Piltdown was of course a fraud, but so is the notion of Boxgrove man as the earliest Englishman, Briton, or even European. Consequently, we have again been dished up a fake, however genuine this time the fossil might be. So there's Robin Dennell, who's quite an insightful guy, seeing how important the language and the geography and the labels we give to deep prehistory are in how it's sold to the public, how it's interpreted by the public, and how careful we have to be. Continuing our narrative, it isn't until the late 90s that Brian E. Coles carries out a review of everything that's known about the North Sea archaeology and topography and gives that landscape a name, Doggerland. And this naming is important. Once that landscape has a name, once that landscape becomes a territory in itself, as opposed to simply the intervening area between Denmark and Britain, it changes our perception of it. People could develop a research agenda for Doggerland. People could develop an approach to Doggerland. Psychologically, it makes a big change. And so we can put Doggerland alongside Sunderland, alongside Beringia, alongside these other submerged and now lost regional units. This is a confection in the sense that at points in time when this much of northwest Europe was exposed because sea level was that low, it would have been so cold there, no river would have been flowing, no tree would have been growing, most of it would have been covered in ice. But that is the full extent of the continental margin during the lowest points of sea level. And this is a National Geographic graphic from about 5 years ago. And it reminded me of the kind of colorized maps of Tolkien's world, or another imagined world. And it has topography on there. And we can give names to these rivers. Names are starting to be given in Doggerland to particular hills, particular ridges, and populating that landscape with names. We have a big transformative thing in Europe, where we find out that the earliest good record comes from southern Europe in the late 90s. And really through the late 90s and into the 2000s, we have a record that really tries to unify the narrative for the continent as a whole. In Britain, research fits into place. We have the Ancient Human Origins of Britain project and the Pathways to Ancient Britain following on, that actually attempts to make sense of the British record as being the limits of human colonization, because it is so patchy, because it is so intermittent, because actually the very north of northwest Europe is only colonizable for very short periods of time. Ahob makes great discoveries, pushing back colonization from Boxgrove at 500,000 years to Pakefield at 750,000 years, and then to Happisburgh to 850,000 years, and finding early humans, maybe Homo erectus even, there in northwest Europe in cool environments, pushing the boundaries of what is possible. Happisburgh also gave us this incredible record from those intertidal muds sitting there between the sea and between the land, often covered by sand, but on this case, one of Ahob's team, and a specialist who works with us on Jersey, Martin Bates and his brother Richard, were down there at a point where the sand had been scoured off and found tens of human footprints mapped out. Funnily enough, large adults, probably males, and lots of kids, not walking anywhere, just milling around. You know, incredible record that required experts who knew what they were looking for just at that point where the storm had stripped off the sand and revealed here a surface almost 1 million years old. These are the oldest human footprints outside of Africa. The record and the narrative that Ahob gave for Northern Europe was for 9 failed colonization attempts. Human populations shown to come into Northern Europe 9 separate times and fail to maintain here because ice ages come. Ice ages drive them out again, and they have to move south. They probably have to move south over south of the Loire. The biggest colonization event probably takes place about 500,000 years ago. And that's because at that point, there's unrestricted access to the UK. there is a land bridge, a permanent land bridge between the Pas-de-Calais and southeast England. This is taken off my TV as I was shouting at it for this documentary. Again, very sensational. Mystery of the Mega Flood. 2012, sorry, not 2012, marine isotope stage 12, which is a cold stage that occurs around 480,000 years ago. You get the build-up as the ice water melts of a massive lake in the southern North Sea. And then this overtips the land bridge across the Straits of Dover and forms the English Channel. From this point on, the first great Brexit, Britain becomes very hard to access, even during stages of lowered sea level. At the centre of the English Channel are two big channels of the English Channel River, and these have these large lenticular islands in. Don't think these are lenticular islands of gravel or sand. These are lenticular islands of rock, where that flood water scoured out the solid geology and left these islands. And you imagine when the sea level lowers to a point when the river doesn't flow, the English landscape there is full of these big eroded islands. It starts to show us that there is no flat, neat surface out there. That is a very complicated landscape indeed. So this brings us on to the context of the Channel Islands and our research. One of the things that we're attempting to do, and I'll talk about this a bit more later, is characterize not the North Sea and Doggerland, but the landscape of the English Channel, or as we're calling it, La Manche. And it's La Manche that we're giving as a name to the English Channel as a submerged landscape with an archaeological record, and for which we are developing a research agenda, and for which the Channel Islands provide examples of the many now submerged islands that sit there still above sea level. If we look at our understanding of the English Channel seabed, we have good mapping from both French and the British Navy and Coast Guard. For large parts of the English Channel, you can see it's a bit more difficult getting into these inshore areas because it's quite shallow. Unfortunately, at the moment, apart from the small areas that we've done, the area of the Channel Islands is very poorly mapped. You've got some shipping routes, you've got some coastal routes, you've got data sets very close to the islands, but this is an area which we still need very much and very desperately to fill in, and that's one of our main priorities over the next few years. To continue our narrative then, Britain from this point on starts to become increasingly deserted, an increasingly precarious record from, say, 300,000 years ago through to 50,000 years ago, in which the absences become longer and the short periods of occupation become shorter, and it becomes harder to find artifacts. Britain becomes an island, of course, during warm periods where you've got high sea level, but we've got evidence as well for periods when it is cold as Britain remaining an island. What also seems to be happening, if we've got these two things going together, we're finding evidence of large icebergs in the English Channel at this time. What seems to be happening, if you have a high sea level, the planet thinks it is in an interglacial. Indeed, the planet must be in an interglacial. So why have you got Arctic ocean temperatures and massive icebergs in the English Channel? That must be because the North Atlantic conveyor, that ocean current bringing warm air up into northwest Europe to stop us having the temperatures of the Labrador coast or the Nova Scotia coast, it collapses. And we're finding it also becomes harder to get into northern Europe because these events are making it extremely cold. We start to get in Britain dwarf mammoth communities and dwarf horse communities as Britain ends up being isolated more and more. Britain at this point has become more marginal. If we go back beyond 500,000 years, these colonization events are far more regular. So this brings us to our interest again in the Channel Islands. The Channel Islands have a very good record from this period of time of human occupation. It has the great sequence of Lockwood. It allows us to look at the record as we understand it on the other side of La Manche, on the other side of the English Channel, and take this great record on the southern margin and compare the two. In order to understand just how difficult it is to get into Britain, we need to understand the dynamics of the population in the areas the areas any movement will be coming from. We need to understand the North French coast. Our colleagues in INRAP, at Caen, at Rennes University are doing this for the continental mainland. The Channel Islands provide other fantastic data sets. And we're starting very slowly to look at the relationship between the dry land signature and the coastal signature and start to map that offshore record. Here's the survey we did last year off Putti-Portale, where you can not only see the continuation of all of these granite bluffs and dead-end valleys out there, but maybe other ancient coastlines out there, other cliff lines. And if there's other cliff lines, there's other caves, there's other fissures, there may be submerged sites out there. We've managed in more detail as well to do the area off Le Cotte. You may be familiar with our hypothesis that it's the very structured gully-ridden landscape off there that provided such good hunting, and the submerged dead-end valley right by Le Cotte that may have been the place where they trapped and hunted mammoth. But in a coarser way, we're now trying to do the whole area around Jersey, understanding where the main rivers coming out of continental Europe cross the landscape. The culmination of our work to date, 6 years of research on the island, in partnership with Jersey Heritage, was the exhibition which has just ended at Jersey Museum. So I hope a lot of you here got a chance to go and see that and see the narrative there, where we've been able to put a narrative of Jersey's prehistory alongside that of continental Europe and Britain to get an idea of the region as a whole. In the time we've been here, we've become attuned to those parts of the landscape that Neanderthals and other prehistoric people have been drawn to, understanding what kind of niches in the landscape. And one of the things are these places where you have a rock and you have a coal behind it and you have a cliff line. Indications that Le Taquerel, the Pinnacle, the Cote La Chèvre, and of course Le Cote de Saint-Brelade, all providing records of Neanderthal archaeology and exploring new sites not only at Les Verrines and Putti-Portale. We now have got away from the idea of trying to think about this as just individual sites, as dots on maps. What we have, whether it's under town, whether it's under Grouville Bay or under St. Juan's Bay, are entire prehistoric land surfaces and landscapes which continue out under the sea. In order to actually find a site, we need to find places like Le Cote de Saint-Brelade that regularly reconcentrated activity again and again. Maybe Putti-Portale is just one such place. Certainly there is a large concentration of material there. And this really provides for us the kind of model of how new sites are going to be discovered. Putti-Portale had been known about in the record for a long period of time. Artifacts have been collected there in the early 20th century. Indeed, there were artifacts on display in Montorgueil when we arrived here. Frederick Zoyner, a great geoarchaeologist, had visited the site to try and locate where these artifacts were coming from and given a description. And 4 years ago, we set out to find that site and completely failed. We carried out some test pitting on the greens around Montorgueil and at the top of the cliff and failed to find anything at all. It was actually Pippa and Sheena, who are here in the audience today, who both, revisiting this site, discovered fresh artifacts, not the weathered stuff that was in the museum, but beautiful fresh artifacts that look completely untouched, not from the cliff where we had been looking, but from the beach itself and from the deposits immediately under the beach. And last year we carried out excavations there, and we have another good new Neanderthal locality here. This is how it's got to work. There's got to be people who know what they're looking for. There's got to be vigilance and some kind of framework of understanding to know how to go and target this material. So we are going to continue on with this research in Jersey, looking at these islands and coasts, and now trying to link this with our colleagues working on the continent. We've got Annelies Ravon digging caves on the coast, on the Brittany coast, Dominic Cliquet just across at Roselle on the Normandy coast. This is his Neanderthal site there. These are the same Neanderthals. These are the same populations. I'm absolutely convinced of it. What we now need to find are the links between the artifacts here the fauna here and the remains in the Channel Islands to show how Neanderthals were moving through and using that landscape, maybe moving from coastline to coastline. There's identical archaeology at Mont Dol. This terrestrial bound island rising not far from Saint-Malo that would have been surrounded by sea during high sea levels, but during cold periods would have been another island that people were attracted to. It's the other great mammoth hunting site in the region, exactly like Le Cote de Saint-Brelade. I'm sure it's the same Neanderthals, the same general population. Moving forward, we want to continue exploring the seabed. This is the Violet Bank off the Seymour Tower, where Arthur Hill found a mammoth tooth. We know there's prehistoric artifacts out there. We suspect some of them might be Neanderthal, but that's a big, challenging landscape to take on. And reconstructing changes in sea level and the responses of Neanderthals. When the sea level is high, we're finding Neanderthals just using beach pebbles. When the sea level is low, we suddenly get, falling into these sites, beautiful large artifacts. Because somewhere out there, there's great raw material sources that are being exposed during these low sea level periods. So, just want to mention briefly, one of the ways in which we're going to actually end up with some really good data is throughout the English Channel region, lots of cables are being laid for infrastructure ahead of wind power, and we're now starting to get data, starting to prospect and starting to find artifacts. So we need to be very careful of how the seabed is used. The next part, I just want to briefly consider islands themselves and why we should pay attention to islands in general. Islands tend to have exceptional archaeological records, and I have no qualms here about putting Hugby and the megalithic record of Jersey alongside other islands with exceptional archaeology. You've probably been following, some of you, the TV series on Orkney and the Nesebrog Gar. Islands have the potential to harness populations to undertake incredible undertakings in terms of engineering and construction, investment in ritual landscapes. Easter Island, Rapa Nui, where part of our university work, is probably the most exceptional case on the planet, the most isolated island, and yet one that doesn't lack in focus, in groups working together to produce something exceptional. And one of my favorite islands in the Mediterranean, Malta, and the great temple complexes, but we could pick Crete as well to put alongside that. Islands have the potential for ways of, for human populations to be transformed in the way they can work together. Islands are ecologically very unique. If we think it was really Darwin's voyage of the Beagle and his explorations on the Galapagos Islands that first solved to him the idea of separation and speciation and led to the origin of species and the theory of evolution. Islands are natural laboratories in looking in variations in different ecologies and what happens to species. We may think of the very exceptional ecologies of Madagascar, the huge predators, these Komodo dragons, or island dwarfism, whether it's Jersey's dwarf deer, Britain's dwarf mammoth. Animals behave in different ways to the challenges that islands present. One island in Southeast Asia gave rise to these dwarf human species, Homo floresiensis, the hobbit, just standing a metre or so wide. And this is an example of Jersey's dwarf deer, of which the best collection is from Belhu Cave alongside a red deer from the continental mainland. Exceptional and distinctive ecologies. Islands are also exceptional in the way humans react to them. They're there on the horizon. They draw humans in. Humans will know there's different resources there, different raw material, potentially fresh water, good grazing for animals. And you can imagine humans, whether they're Neanderthals or modern humans in this landscape, seeing the archipelago of the Channel Islands and making a beeline for it. They may do that every season, they may return again and again, as we have indications of them doing at Le Cote, or they may see these great rising land masses for the first time, but they will be drawn towards them because they are part of their reality, terrestrial islands at different levels. But islands have very fragile ecosystems as well. They can be very vulnerable. A lot of the incredible endeavors in Rapa Nui collapse at the point it's deforested and they're getting soil erosion. Islands existing at sea level today are very vulnerable to climate change. So in exploring kind of island futures, exploring the way islands are going to adapt to the challenges of climate change, I think we can look to the past and take some hope in the fact that islands can actually be incredibly agile and responsive in some way the societies and cultures of the continental mainlands can't. Certainly, small constrained land masses have never been any challenge in the past to engineering new solutions and performing kind of exceptional undertakings of cohesion. Part of this is going to be reimagining not only the position of the islands in the region, but reimagining those regions themselves. Certainly for the late Neanderthals of this region, which I've only seen before through the eyes of my understanding of the British record, which at the end of Neanderthals' time on the planet is very marginal, which is a very meagre record. This is the site of Linford in East Anglia, which is about our only good site for the area, an area where they were maybe scavenging mammoth carcasses, defrosting out of the permafrost. But if we look at the British record alongside that of La Manche and of northern France, we get a different view. We can map different styles of lithic technology and see patterns that must be maintained, because this is a 5,000-year window in which we're seeing this move north right at the end of the Neanderthals' time on the planet before they disappear. And we can see these groupings, which are cultures. The Kalmesser grouper and the MTA grouper and the Boucoupé grouper, particular ways of making stone tools and technology that must be culturally maintained. And we can see that the Channel Islands and the artifacts that we find here and in small parts of northern France, just on the very fringe, are identical to those we find in Britain and very different to those that we find across Brittany and large parts of France. That says to me that the centre of this culture does not lie either in Britain or in Normandy or in the Channel Islands, but in the La Manche region, which at that point is dry land. This is a La Manche culture, not one that can be claimed by any nation today. So to finish, I want us to just think about La Manche and think about how we start to reimagine it. We began with Admiralty charts that were produced in the 19th century and embellished. We now have, as you've seen, far higher resolution, incredible resolution of the detail of these landscapes, and we need to make sure we extend that now into the Channel Islands area and right up to the modern-day coastlines. We already have in our imagination a psychogeography of particular parts of that landscape. I think in this part of the channel, the one that holds the biggest sway is the Herd Deep, this massive canyon that cuts through the soft Cretaceous geologies off the coast of Normandy and off the Normandy coast as well, out into the Western English Channel. One of the dark parts of the psychogeography of the place is that this is where Britain dumped a lot of medium and low-level nuclear waste in the post-war era. Here's a barrel of, I don't know what, dumped in the Herd Deep. Just imagine, if we ever do go into another ice age and sea level lowers and the La Manche River is flowing again, that water, before it empties out in the ocean, will go through the nuclear effluent of British culture before it discharges out into the Atlantic. What will reindeer drinking water here, how will they fare worse than mammoth drinking water up here? Who knows? But its territory, its geography, it has topography out there, and we need to start imagining it as a real, genuine landscape. In order to do this, and especially with the public, we have to weigh this against the huge weight of history, and especially in British history, the position that the English Channel holds, whether in modern memories of people either having cross-channel journeys on ferries or going first on the Eurostar, or history, whether it's from 1066 through to the Second World War by way of the Spanish Armada and Napoleon. The English Channel runs through that deep history that actually defines that difference between Britain and the rest of the continent. Instead, we need to give them other views. This is a mega flood landscape from the western United States, the Washington Scablands. This, on this planet, is the best analogy for the La Manche landscape, islands of solid rock carved out by massive floodwater discharge. That is the landscape of La Manche, and if you look at that landscape, you can instantly see how good that would be for hunting, how good that would be for tracking animals, for tracking and trapping animals, and also for getting access to really good raw material. It's a landscape that you will not find anywhere in France, anywhere in Britain. It is a landscape unique unto itself and has its own character. One of the ways we can start to get the public to imagine that landscape is to stop thinking of the horizon as unbreakable and stop thinking of the topography of the landscape as just being completely flat. With the building of infrastructure and the increasing expansion of renewable infrastructure, topography is being mapped, geology is being mapped out there, and infrastructure is being put onto the seabed. These are opportunities to get new scientific data, new data sets, and to recreate that landscape. And also to show them that that landscape now is connected to our society, to our towns, to our homes. So we need to bring people into those landscapes and get them to explore it. We need to populate it with names. Why does it matter? I think it should matter because other people are interested in it. I don't recommend it, but if you go to Stormfront, which is the big repository for right-wing, extreme right-wing discourse in the United States, for which plenty of Europeans take part in it, you'll see they are fascinated by prehistory. Here's a really benign post on the Stormfront website asking people to get involved in one of our projects when UCL were asking for volunteers. Are you interested in prehistory? We probably work with these people, we don't know, but they are engaged and they're working in prehistory. Here's another similar right-wing website that's talking about Doggerland DNA. And the extreme right are fascinated by Doggerland DNA because to them it taps into their Wagnerian kind of idea of a lost Valhalla-like landscape where all of the people of the right colouring maybe came from. And where does it sit? It sits there in the middle of Denmark, the Netherlands, Germany, and Britain. And there are DNA testing people who will tell you whether you have Doggerland DNA. It is fake science. But people are coughing up, and people are getting themselves tested, and people are going around saying, I've got Doggerland ancestry. And it means something to them. It's part of their new identity as a descendant of the original Doggerland people. They're interested in it, so we should absolutely take notice. Also, continuing on something that we've always been passionate about, what it tells us about is human responses to climate change in the region. How long can people last here when climate cools? How quickly can they return here? And how can we use the past to look at the natural range of temperature variation, to examine the degree to what we're seeing now in terms of sea level rise and temperature change is truly out of step with the past or within normal limits. So, what's next for Jersey's deep prehistory and where I stop? Jersey is still absolutely at the centre of our research, but I hope what I've articulated to you at the moment is however passionately we're interested in the archaeology of this region, it's only because of this island, it's only because it unlocks the region. And that's Jersey's power and potential in not just telling the story of the island, but telling the story of the entire region and unlocking the submerged landscape of La Manche. And I'll stop there. Thank you.